Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back, all you listeners and viewers of this week's Live from the Heartland show. And you regular listeners and viewers know that a few weeks back we had the jazz writer Howard Mandel talking about a jazz writers awards that were coming up. And I asked him right there on the air if he would come on regularly, maybe once a month, to give us a jazz update. So Howard, good day to you. I'm so glad you're back for your monthly appearance on this show. And one of the things that in going over what we might talk about came up was the AACM, the Advancement of Creative Musicians. You can give me the correct name. They're about 60 years old. And, from Fred Anderson to a lot of other people, I think, they made a real mark on the music industry, particularly in jazz. So how about giving us a little history and what you want to share about the AACM?
Sure. Thanks, Mike, for having me on again. It's really exciting to be here. So the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians is sort of a members cooperative that got established in 1965. And it has produced a large number of American musicians really at the forefront of experimenting and composing and improvising in really fresh and impactful ways. They've been very influential. Later today, I get to talk to Henry Threadgill, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was an early member of the AACM, and now he's in New York, and he's a world-renowned musician. And that'll be exciting. I'm doing a Downbeat article on the 60th anniversary of the festival. So I've talked to a number of people recently who are involved with the organization now and who were back 60 years ago. And I was really lucky living on the south side of Chicago in the 60s. I began to hear some of this music, and I thought, wow, this is amazing stuff, because they were moving away from standard song form. They were experimenting with timbres and instrumentation. Everybody seemed to play 4 or 5 instruments. The music was very expressionistic. It was very vivid and emotional and powerful. And I thought, wow, this is great. And actually, nobody seemed to be writing very much about it. And that set me on a course, a professional course that I followed, all these 60 years. I started writing about the AACM in around 1968, and I was hearing them from 67 on. So I've followed them for a long time, and I've seen a lot of developments. I know a lot of these musicians in Chicago now, people like Kahil El-Zabar, Edward Wilkerson, Ernest Dawkins, Nicole Mitchell, the flutist, Ben Lamar Gay, the cornetist, Mike Reed, people who just really have had a lot of impact. Roscoe Mitchell from the Art Ensemble of Chicago, and Fred Anderson, of course, we miss from the days of the Velvet Lounge. He's been deceased for, I guess, about a decade now, which is unfortunate. But he left a great legacy. And the AACM, which also has a school training program for young musicians in Chicago, and it tries to get most of its members involved in that, teaching. Renee Baker is a classically trained violinist who now is the chair of the AACM. I spoke to her a few days ago. And she's got plans to increase the number of concerts that they hold. They have a space of their own now in a church on the west side, and their concerts are usually free.
Has the AACM been almost all African American? Are there any white or Latino dudes and dudettes in there?
It has been almost completely African American. And that was a matter of some contention back in the 60s and into the 70s. George Lewis, the trombonist and educator, and he wrote a book called greater than itself, the AACM and contemporary, what's he call it? Contemporary experimental music. And he goes into detail about the discussions of whether this should be a African American only organization. And I think it has been that in practice, if not in constitution. There are some white musicians I know in New York who have been associated with the AACM putting on concerts. Marty Ehrlich, who is a alto saxophone player originally from St. Louis, and he's a white guy. He's performed, and there are a few others. But the AACM musicians operate independently, mostly. So this is one of the unique things about this organization. It encourages individuals to do their own things. And in many cases, AACM musicians do work with Latin or Asian or Caucasianly, ethnically white musicians, but outside of AACM confines.
Well, we're big fans of Rainbow Coalition kind of stuff. Chicago is a wonderful place that has people from everywhere. And I know we all move from our own little sectors, but there's plenty of crossing over and working together. One of the things that you mentioned in our correspondence was the Jazz Institute had a gala recently, and our old friend Lauren Deutsch was involved. Lauren Deutsch was involved with the Jazz Institute, and I haven't followed it as much lately. But I think there was recently a performance by Branford Marsalis with some local people involved. How about you give us a little bit on that before we go into all these upcoming festivals that are going to keep us busy on our off time?
Sure. Well, the Jazz Institute, like many of the nonprofits, does gala fundraising, and this was just last week. Branford Marsalis was the headliner of this very posh gala fundraiser at the Hilton Hotel, and there were about 450 people there to raise money for the Jazz Institute. I think they raised almost $100,000. So this was great. The Institute needs this kind of funding since the NEA has cut back on funding jazz-related activities. Orbert Davis and his partner, Mark, his business partner, were celebrated at the Jazz Institute Gala, and they announced that they were establishing a scholarship in the name of Lauren Deutsch for a woman to study jazz. And Lauren was there. I had urged her to attend. She had been reluctant, but she loves the Institute, but she's been, she retired from being executive director of the Institute 6 years ago, I believe. She still works on the archive committee, which I also work on, and we have some really exciting news about that, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But anyway, I had to persuade Lauren to attend this, and Orbert Davis also had said, well, we're going to do something kind of nice for you, so it'd be nice for you to be there. And so Lauren came, and they announced this from the stage, and she was floored and just amazed, then pleased, and said there's nothing that she would rather have her name associated with. More than a scholarship.
I'm going to spill a few beans about Lauren. She was one of my very first students when I taught a class called Organizing for Social Change at Columbia College. And she later became a member of Rising Up Angry, which was an organization I was affiliated with. And she's just a wonderful person, and I'm so glad. And you mentioned Orbert Davis, and let me just tell you, last night I participated in this Picha Kucha. I'm not sure how you say it, but it's a worldwide event that's held on a Tuesday night. And I think the next one in Chicago will be at the Martyrs in September. But I was asked to present there by a fellow named Michael Jackson, who's a British guy who's a very talented, and he was playing a hell of a saxophone, and Orbert Davis was blowing us away with his trumpet. So talk a little bit about the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic, which Orbert Davis is involved with, and it focuses a little bit on Cuban music, immigrant communities. They got an event around Helen Scott coming up. Fill us in.
Yeah. Well, the Philharmonic is another one of the really fine Chicago organizations that are, promoting jazz in many forms and have a mission to include young people in training, teaching, and especially recognition of immigrant communities in Chicago, which are no longer immigrant communities, but are communities that, have ethnic backgrounds and their own cultures. One of the things that Orbert has done has been to take musicians from Chicago to Cuba to perform and to steep themselves in the Afro-Cuban rhythms and traditions. And then he's also brought Cuban musicians back to Chicago, which is a major feat. It's very tricky to get the visas and permissions to do that. But he had a young coterie, I think there were almost 24, and they performed at the Auditorium Theater with very little rehearsal, but great spirit and wonderful results. I hope he's able to do something like that again. But Orbert and the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic perform in a couple of different venues around Chicago, North Side and South Side. I think he lives in Beverly. And he's just a wonderful guy. He's also performed on the Jazz Festival stage, the Chicago Jazz Festival stage.
When you mentioned, let me just throw in, when you mentioned bringing musicians from Cuba, I brought the band Mezcla, and we brought them a number of times, and I think the Hot House brought them too, but we couldn't bring them during the Bush years. And I imagine that bringing people in under the trumpet years is going to be hard, but we shall see.
Yeah, well, I mean, the important thing is to keep this music going here, and all the Caribbean musics, draw from the Afro-Cuban base legacy. So there is a Latin Jazz Festival coming up in Humboldt Park. I think that is July 11th and 12th. And I'm not sure who the artists are, but there'll be it would be great if there were some Cuban musicians at that event. I don't know who's been booked. We have a responsibility to try to reach out and to hear that music because it's so influential. It lies under so much we do. And there has been a very strong Chicago-Cuban connection through Hot House and people like Barbara Dane. So let's keep that going.
Well, tell us a little bit about some other festivals and things going on. I know the Hyde Park Jazz Festival isn't until late September, the 27th and 28th, but they've been around doing a festival for 19 years, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit about it? And I understand they're challenged because of loss of funds.
Well, that's true. They lost a $30,000 grant that they expected to get from the federal government, from the NEA, I think. And that put a little crimp in their planning, but they are trying to rebound. And their gala is June 25th, I think. So they're fundraising there. And interestingly, the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic's gala is the next day. So there's a lot of trying to stir up the base and say, come on, let's contribute to keep this music happening here. The Hyde Park Jazz Festival has been so great. It is also free or paid by donation. It's multiple stages all through Hyde Park. They have a like an avenue of music that runs along the midway and with stages at both ends. And they have concerts at Logan Square, the Logan Center. They have concerts at Court Theater, one of the churches that's in Hyde Park. So it's really hard to get to everything. And the climax of the day, it's a 2-day festival. The climax Saturday night is a concert in Rockefeller Chapel. So it's usually a soloist to take advantage of or to deal with the challenging acoustics of Rockefeller Chapel. It can be a very beautiful event at the end of the day. Um, it's a great festival. I mean, Kate Doubleton is responsible for a lot of the curation, and she has really great tastes. And they've brought in fantastic musicians from outside Chicago and hiring the most exciting Chicago musicians also. It's a really great thing to, it's a nice time of year. It's nice to sit out by the Midway or to ramble around Hyde Park. I always enjoy that a lot. And people turn out. I mean, it's really a community festival, as is the Chicago Jazz Festival, which happens on Labor Day weekend, as is the Latin Jazz Festival. These are all really neighborhood, community-oriented events, which is wonderful. And the Blues Festival this weekend, even.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about the Blues Festival and some overlap between blues and jazz. But I also I heard last night about Hazel Scott, and I'm wondering that the Chicago Jazz Philharmonic is putting on an event at the Logan Center on June 25th. And I wonder if you could tell us who Hazel Scott was, what her situation is, and how this all came to be.
Oh, gee, Hazel Scott was a pianist and a vocalist in the New York Harlem late night milieu in the 50s, mostly. I think is when her star was highest, and I believe she was married to Adam Clayton Powell, the African American politician. And she's a very sophisticated lady and player. I mean, I always think of her in terms of Lena Horne or someone along those lines. And this is sort of pre-Nina Simone. So she was not as politically direct and aggressive, assertive perhaps. But she was making a dent in civil rights support. And I never have talked to Orbert about his enjoyment of her. So I'm sort of surprised that he's focused on her, but she's a good person to bring up and to shine some light on her music. That'll be fun.
Howard, we've talking a little bit about all these festivals, and the Chicago Jazz Festival comes up, and I'm wondering if you can recall some of your favorite performances that you saw there.
Oh, gosh. Yes. My favorite performances at the Chicago Jazz Festival. There's so many. Betty Carter trio playing in a heavy rainstorm, and we all sat in Grant Park with our coats over our heads to try and protect ourselves. And she was so amazed that we were staying there. Oh, I love that show. There was a Sun Ra performance in which at the end of the day, again, this was at the Petrillo Band Shell, and he had everybody in Grant Park chanting, "We are the people of the sun, we are the people of the sun," while the orchestra was just going crazy on stage. That was fantastic. I've been hearing some of the old performances because I work on the archive committee at the Jazz Institute. We have 850 recordings from the Chicago Jazz Festival from 1979 to 2022. And those concerts, there's the best Miles Davis, electric period Miles Davis I've ever heard from 91, 1 year before he died. He comes out on stage, he's so eager to play and full of ideas. And there's another one I heard that I loved that was Von Freeman with the organ player Charles Erland. And Von, was a very big-hearted Chicago tenor player. And he came out, and Charles Erland is no slouch, and a bluesy kind of guy, and was really known for playing a lot of organ, using every aspect of the organ. And Von started on a really up-tempo bluesy number, and he played it for like 12 minutes. Charles, you could just hear him working to hang on, And then at the end of the performance, Von says on the mic, "Oh well, Charles, that was really good. I will slow it down for you now." And that was that was hilarious. But there have been many fine performances. I mean,
Well,
um,
Howard, let me, we're going to have to go out soon. So I'm going to ask you, since this weekend, listeners and people who stream the show uh, might still take in the Chicago Blues Festival. It's June 5th to the 8th. This show goes up on the 6th. How about there was an article in New City about Frank Catalano, Italian Chicago musician, and the guitarist Laurie Bell. And Laurie Bell is always someone who caught my attention. We had him at the Heartland Cafe, and you talk a little bit about, you've talked to me a little bit about the connection between blues and jazz, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Frank and Laurie and their new album out on Delmark.
the album is called "Set Me Free," and it's really fun to listen to. I mean, Lurie is, I think, the best Chicago blues guitarist after Buddy Guy. I mean, he's really got the sound, and he's lived a hard life in the blues. His father, of course, was Gary Bell, the harmonica player, so he grew up in it. But and he's worked a lot with Billy Branch and Sons of the Blues. But Lurie himself has a great sound, and he's turned into a good singer also. So Frank Catalano, who's more of a jazz player, kind of a bebopish, hard blowing player, the two of them have gotten together on this record, "Set Me Free," and it really epitomizes the connection between jazz and blues. I mean, this has always been the case, since 1921. Really, the musics are siblings, and we can think of a lot of bluesy, jazzy albums. Gee, and so many. King Curtis comes to mind. Somebody who played with Aretha Franklin and also had instrumental hits, or that's a tenor player who, like Frank Catalano, who could work with the really funky guitar players and with that backbeat and keep the songs edited down. So, they're bite size. That's some of what's going on in their music. And they are the second to the last show on the night that is headlined by Mavis Staples. And that's just the best double feature that you're going to hear in Chicago this weekend.
So that's going to be, for people who are listening or viewing, that's on Sunday, Sunday the 8th. That would be great. Let me throw one more thing at you. Give me a club or two here in Chicago where you saw a performance you liked recently. I'm thinking of the Constellation Room. I don't know if you've been there or what's happening, but that's just one place that comes to mind. What do you got?
Which room was that?
Constellation.
Oh, Constellation. Yes. So the best thing I heard at Constellation, this was just last weekend, was a tribute to the late Mars Williams. And Mars was a member of the NRG ensemble that Hal Russell headed up, composer, kind of a trickster, jokester kind of guy. And Mars worked in pop music with Psychedelic Furs and with the Waitresses. He's famously got a sax solo on the song "I Know What Boys Like." And if you want to hear a cute pop song, look that one up on YouTube. But Mars was also a very serious horn player and played with toys and composed music. So at Constellation, there was a tribute concert to him last Saturday, performed by an all-star ensemble. I mean, the horns were Ken Vandermark, Dave Rempis, John Arabagan, Ben Lamargay played cornet. There were violinist, cellist, guitar player, Steve Marquette. Jeff Albert came up from New Orleans because Mars also had a connection to New Orleans musicians, and they performed this piece that he'd written called "The Devil's Whistle." And this piece had been written as a multimedia spectacular for a installation in New Orleans called the Music Village. And it's all these like wooden platforms and like tree houses that the musicians inhabit and play from there. And they showed a film clip of how this worked. And Mars was conducting from the middle of this space. But of course, he's been deceased for just over a year, I think. And these were his friends playing. And this is the North Side Improvisers. This is that coterie of Chicago's jazz scene. Very, very energized, and gosh, they meant this music. This music, so powerful. It was a full house at Constellation. The audience loved it. The playing was high quality, taking us where jazz takes us when it's good. It lifts us up, gives us a lot of energy coming out.
Howard Mandel, thanks so much for coming on. I'll see you next month, if not before.